It's good to be here. We are Advocates for Faith and Freedom. If you don't know who we are or what we do, we're a nonprofit religious liberty organization. And we're lawyers, and we take on religious liberty cases around the country. Most of our work of late has been in California. As you know, California is just a hotbed of things. And so this is a place where I really think, Satan he's got his work is deep and far rooted in Sacramento, all over the place in California. And so we find ourselves really busy, and God put us here for a time such as this. I know He did. I hesitate to share this at times, but I had a dream at one point in time about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was so evident to me that God had called me to be a lawyer to try to defend the First Amendment right to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ as long as possible. And this dream is there was this ball of fire, and I was standing against it, and I woke up, and it was so vivid, and I was praying in the middle of the night, and I just felt like what the Lord was speaking to me was the times are short, and what He's called me to do as a lawyer is to defend the First Amendment right to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ as long as possible. And I will tell you that I think there's going to come a day when, maybe in California we won't be able to. Maybe in the United States we might not be able to. Well, we certainly will, right? But you know what? On one hand, isn't it exciting? You guys, what are you, crazy? I had always prayed as a young man and just trying to think about what God wants me to be and where He wants me to go. And I just wanted to serve the Lord. I wanted to have some significance. Sometimes I think, okay, I really don't want to be significant anymore. It's just too tough. And not that I am significant, but it's just one of these things where I look at it and I say, in these end times, which I believe we're in, I think that we all have an opportunity, and we are going to have opportunities to be out in our community and to be a Christ representative in real difficult times. And how wonderful, when we sit here and we talk about China. Well, they've had difficult times for a long time, those Christians there, right? And the gospel's spreading, and you hear about millions upon millions of people coming into the Lord. I was talking to Pastor Ray Bentley, probably I don't know, it was about a year ago, 2 years ago, and he had just come back from some tours, and he was telling me about what was going on over in Iran and in the Middle East, and people are converting to Christianity because they've had dreams. This is incredible stuff, and so I'm waiting. Okay, Lord, we're ready for this here in California. We want you to work, and I want Him to work, and I want to be a part of the work. And it's kind of odd. We're lawyers and being a part of God's work. You might not believe it, but we can be. I'm serious. Let me jump into our study here, or my message today. And I wrote this booklet called Hijacked K through 12, and this is going to be the substance of what we're talking about today. But I want to relate it to what's going on a larger scale. Hijacked K through 12. I wrote because I had a friend who went to a California Teachers Association conference. And I saw that, boy, we need to do something because we saw some video, and we'll show you a few things today. Now, do we have any teachers in the room? Come on, we got to have a couple. A few of them? All right, great. I want to just take one. Okay, we got a fellow in the back whose hand is still up. All right, sir, what grade do you teach? What grade do you teach? Okay. Do we have any public school teachers in the room? No? Okay, let me get the lady in the back. Yeah. What's your name? Christina. And what grade do you teach? Where do you teach? Okay. Within Romoland School District, how many teachers do you think are Christians, or even have maybe conservative Christian values, or at least, let me just say, have kind of traditional values? What percentage do you think in your school district are like that? 20% or less? That's not the number I was hoping for. You know, a lot of times when I speak and I talk about this, I've had a lot of teachers say, oh, I've got 40, 50% of our teachers are Christians, or at least at a bare minimum have traditional values. You know, kind of what we all grew up, I say we all grew up on. I'm not the younger person in the crowd anymore. But for a lot of us, we looked at it and said, man, this is not the schools are not like what it was when we grew up. Traditional values were taught in the schools. And so we're seeing that what's happened is the California Teachers Association has really taken control of what's happening in the state. And so we're going to talk about that in this booklet. And the first thing I want the teachers here in this room to know, that you guys are missionaries to a lost world. You are missionaries. Like Daniel, remember how Daniel, he was taken into captivity and he was taught for 3 years under Nebuchadnezzar's university, and he was taught with the wise men, the magicians, these deceivers, and he had to be a part of that. Yet somehow, in the midst of all that, he rose so high in government and took charge over Babylon eventually after God used him to interpret dreams. And so here's a great example of what it must have been like living in Babylon when you're taken captive and you're taught in their ways and you're told to bow down. And wow, I use him as a great example of how we today have to live. And so teachers, in one sense, you're in the midst of Babylon, and I pray that you would recognize that and figure out how God's going to use you like he used Daniel, and kids in the same way. But let me get back to this. Dr. Martin Luther King, in 1963, he wrote, the church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. Pastor Tom, thank you that your church stands as a moral authority in this world, as a beacon, as a church that leads its congregation, because there are so many churches that are absolutely missing that. But what Martin Luther King said was prophetic. I'm beginning to question, and it concerns me that here this Christian church, this when you think about the Christian church, when you might read about it in the newspaper, that has this huge umbrella, and it scares me that there are giant denominations these days that are not teaching the Word of God. They're teaching a false gospel, and they're leading millions of people astray who call themselves Christians. And I think what Martin Luther King said in 1963 was so prophetic. In 1993, there was a situation in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, the homosexual organizations were out, and they were enforced. They were trying to get into the school districts. And particularly in San Francisco, they were focused, and they were trying to bring in this thing called Project 10, and they were having success. And it was the beginning of the introduction of homosexuality into our public school system. Now, a friend of mine, Terry Thompson, a lawyer who battled with me side by side as in the Proposition 22 litigation, he told me about this, and he was there when Pastor Lou Sheldon, or Reverend Lou Sheldon, had come to speak at Hamilton Baptist Church. I have a little more information that I'd learned in the Proposition 22 litigation where we needed to find a new plaintiff because we found the Superior Court judges were not going to rule in our favor to give us an injunction to stop the mayor from issuing same-sex marriage licenses. And what we did was we found that there was this pastor, and this fellow's named Pastor Chuck McElhaney. And Pastor Chuck had been in San Francisco ministering for many years. He'd had bricks thrown through his window over his children's crib. He had his home firebombed, his church firebombed, because he spoke out against homosexuality. And so Pastor Chuck was at this meeting as well in San Francisco at Hamilton Baptist Church, where they came after a school board meeting. I've seen video of what went on at the school board meeting, and it was astonishing what you would see. Crowds of homosexual activists who were sitting all over the floor inside this building with a bullhorn, and every time that some of the pastors in the community would get up to speak in front of the school board to speak out against this homosexual indoctrination that they were trying to bring in this curriculum, the crowd would pound their feet on the floors, and they would scream and yell, so you couldn't even hear them speak. There was absolutely no control. It was almost like just anarchy here. Well, after one of the school board meetings, mind you, this battle, you'll hear, was going on for some time, about 5 years, and they were at a church. And my friend Pastor Terry Thompson was sitting next to a blind woman in this church as the homosexual activists had gathered outside the church and were protesting this group of Christians. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you an audio tape. And I'll be honest, for some kids, if your kids are young, it could be a little scary. So you might take that into consideration. So you got 1 second to get them out. Just kidding. It's not that bad. Okay, and what I'm going to do for sake of time, I'm going to kind of jump through this. It's probably about let me see if I can. Oh, actually, I think, Pastor Henry, I think you might have to play this. Because this, I don't think audio is not connected here. Can you play it from back there? Now I got you guys all teed up for this thing. Not that one.
Canada.
This is it.
And
can you go and jump up go about halfway through it, if you're able to.
No, Jerry, no.
The homosexual activists are pounding on
Jerry,
the doors on the
alone.
outside. My friend told me
folks,
that the doors.
If you think this is a show, you should have been
in.
at the school board meeting about 5 years ago.
Outside.
When they put through Project 10. This is nothing compared to that.
The police were outside. Apparently had no control.
Okay. Now you see what your preacher's been going to? And when I see this, I say somebody had better stand up to it. And if we don't stand up to this, folks, it's going all through the country. And I've told you they're going to be at the front door of the church. And they are. They're here today. And this is why the average preacher won't get involved in controversy, won't take a stand, and it's an utter capitulation that's taking place in our country today. It's an utter capitulation. Now, they're having a great time. But I happen to, well, I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do. I've got some things I'm going to do in the next few days. And Brother Lumpkin, you're hearing all of this too. Have they been to
You go ahead and stop it, Pastor Henry. Wow, I don't know about you, but the first time I heard that, it just brought chills to my body and listening to that. And this was in 1993. And you hear Reverend Lou Sheldon saying, if the churches don't stand up to this, if pastors don't stand up to this, it's going all through the country. And it has. Here we are in 2013. Here we are, and our country is faced with what was unthinkable 10 years ago, same-sex marriage. California is now faced with the unthinkable. The AB 1266, this new bill that says kids can choose whatever gender they want and go into whatever restroom they want. Now, it's a difficult time, but at the same time, we have to remember, well, we're Christians first. How did Daniel do it? How did he live in Babylon? And so I'm constantly thinking about this because I often speak and address a lot of these issues. And it's tough because you can get really, really angry. You hear that audio and you think, let's go out and let's do something about it. So it reminds me of Colossians 4, 2 through 6. And here it says, devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving. Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person. That's tough to do, but I include this now in this presentation and when I speak often because I need to remind myself that we are Christians first. And I know that there may very well be folks in the room that could struggle with the issues of the satanic issues that are in front of us today. The issue of homosexuality or concern, having difficulties, kids, young people having extreme difficulties and confusion over sexual issues. They see on TV now at such a young age, boys kissing each other. The model that's presented to them of a great father is a homosexual man. And it's a difficult thing. And here in these days, when I really believe we're in the last days, our kids are being deceived. And so as I was driving over here, I was praying, and I really don't think Satan wanted me to be here because I had this migraine at 3:30 today, and it was pounding, and I'm driving over here just saying, oh, Lord, take this thing away, and praise God, it's gone. But as I was praying and with my eyes open, driving, I was thinking about Matthew chapter 24, and in Matthew 24, talking about the end times, signs of the times and the end of the age, and the disciples questioning Jesus, what'll be the end days? What's the sign of your coming? And in verse 4 it says, and Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And I was talking to Pastor Tom and back, and you guys can go and you can take a look at 1 Timothy chapter 3, where it talks about deception in the end times. In verse 11 of Matthew 24, it says, then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Boy, as you think about that, just think about the deceit, the evil that is being brought. That at the same time, this lawlessness. Here are the people, we have a democracy in California. And it's real easy to be self-focused. The end times, it's all about California, right? It's not, of course. But at the same time, there is this lawlessness. And you look at what's going on in our own state about this whole idea where the Supreme Court basically throws out the power of the people to vote on an important issue such as marriage. And then you have the UN being so involved in trying to push this radical agenda on us, this agenda of sexual liberation. And there are so many people that are deceived. And when you take a look at some of these things, and I was so excited when I drove up and I saw on the side of the building that Sunday nights is about end times. And it's not that I was, I'm just excited because I felt like this is what the Lord had put on my heart, that the times are difficult. And the times, I think, we're coming to an end. And I think that we're going to see Christ. And we're going to see him while we're still alive. And so as I think about some of these things, and I've been praying and been studying the end times myself, in the last 60 days, we have had more phone calls from Christians around the country needing help because they've been fired from their jobs because they're Christian. We had a couple ministers in Orange County who the ACLU and a lesbian couple came up and tried to remove their licensing because they claimed discrimination because they wouldn't marry them. So many issues like this. We've had more phone calls in the last 60 days than we've had the entire year. Frankly, we've probably had more phone calls in the last 60 days than we have had in 2 years from people needing help around the country. And so it's exciting, but scary at the same time. And maybe I shouldn't say scary, but we know what's there, and we know what the future holds. So we don't need to be scared. I think what we just need to do is we need to be thinking like Daniel, God, where are you going to put us, and what can we do in these last days? Now, I skipped over a video because for sake of time. But let me jump to this booklet, Hijacked K through 12, and talk about the California Teachers Association, what's going on in our public schools. Now, I told you I had a friend who went to a conference, and it was the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, Transgender Conference of the California Teachers Association. This is the union that purportedly represents the teachers of California. Well, I guarantee you it doesn't represent the 30 to 50% of the Christians who are teachers. It doesn't. But in this conference, what they had is they had this program. And my Christian friend who went to go to hear what's going on in the conference, he came back and he showed me this program. And one of the things that they were pushing, and this was a few years back, about 4 years ago, they're pushing this concept of gender liberation. And you'll see, I pulled some quotes out of the program. And they in this one page it was titled Gender Etiquette. Gender Etiquette. And here's what they said. They said, please do not assume anyone's gender, even people you may have met in the past. Another line, we consider it polite to ask, what pronoun do you prefer? Or how do you identify? Before using pronouns or gendered words for anyone. Each of us can decide for ourselves in which bathroom we belong. Crazy, huh? And then in 2007, we have this Senate Bill 777 that was passed to redefine gender. And what does gender mean in California? Now, in 2007, the law was changed as it relates to the education code, and this new definition of gender was presented. In 2005, the California Penal Code was changed so that the definition of gender and sex was redefined to include this definition as well. So this is the precursor to what we have today that was recently passed, this AB 1266. And here's the definition of gender for California purposes. Gender means sex and includes a person's gender identity and gender expression. What does gender expression mean? Gender expression means a person's gender-related appearance and behavior, and here's the important part, whether or not stereotypically, do you hear that word, stereotypically? Associated with the person's assigned sex at birth. I'm glad my doctor got it right. But we'll never know, right? You're never going to know for sure. Because, in the Proposition 8 trial, they had an expert witness, and he stood up, and his testimony was this, that sexuality is determined based upon a spectrum or a continuum. On one end, there's some people who are always heterosexual, And on the other end, you have some people who are always homosexual. But most people fluctuate in between during their lives. You can laugh. I mean, this is what they're teaching and this is what they're pushing. The agenda is no longer, well, we were born that way. The agenda is about gender liberation. So let's just disregard whether you're born one way or the other. The fact is we all have a choice and we can be whatever we want to be sexually. This sexual liberation that is being pushed is so radical. And the intent is to destroy the family. The intent is to destroy, I believe, the church. And to undermine the gospel. And to undermine the Bible. To undermine God's definition of male and female. To undermine the account of creation when God created Adam and Eve. And this is what is being pushed in our California public schools. What does it mean? It has these equal opportunities regardless of one's gender identity. And you have to allow any child who self-defines himself or herself as a male or female, they get to choose whatever they want. Now, this most recently, we have AB 1266. And what does it say? It says kids can choose whatever gender they want to be. And frankly, it doesn't provide any limits. Kids can choose to be a male Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and a female Tuesday and Thursday, and the weekends, hey, we're free to be whatever we want to be. It sounds so radical, but it's true. That's the law in California. So if you have kids in public school, boy, you've got to be involved. You've got to know what's happening. You've got to know what's going on in your school districts here. And we need some of you to run for school board. Because what some of the school boards are doing, and they're concerned, what they're doing is they are trying to limit this and saying, well, we're going to adopt a policy that says a child has to express themselves as the opposite gender for 3 months before we'll allow them to use the opposite sex restrooms and locker rooms. But I tell you, there's school districts that have been allowing this for years, Los Angeles and San Francisco particularly. We've had cases where boys have been using the girls' locker room. We had one case a number of years ago where a boy in L.A. County went into the girls' locker room. He was the prom queen, by the way, and he was elected by the kids. And what he did is he went in for a week and he had fully disrobed himself in front of the girls. And did it for a week. And then he decided, okay, I'm not a girl anymore, and he went back to using the boys' locker room. But that is the mischievousness that's going to occur. And it's the law, and it's going to happen unless we, the people, are able to vote. Now, will we have another Prop 8 situation? Possibly. We're going to go up, we're going to fight, we're going to defend, but we're going to do what God's called us to do, and we're going to try to fight and try to preserve values as long as we can. As long as we can. I'm going to jump a couple slides. Jump you like and come beat you up. No, I don't mean that. Okay. So my friend who went to this California Teachers Association conference went and videotaped. And he says, I'm going to go and I'm going to ask them if they'll speak to me on video. And then what we're going to do is we are going to bring it back to our local union, and we're going to show them what was presented at this conference. Now, this video, this is a second grade school teacher who is speaking, and this second grade school teacher is a gentleman who is homosexual, who is on the board for the California Teachers Association, but he's also on the board for Equality California. Now, Equality California is this organization that we have battled often in the courts. And Equality California is one of the organizations, but one of the main sponsors of the original domestic partnership legislation. And they were behind battling and funding the plaintiffs in the Proposition 8 case, using movie director Rob Reiner's millions of dollars to fund them, to fight us. So this gentleman is on the board for Equality California and the California Teachers Association. I believe are probably the two most powerful organizations, lobbying type organizations in the state. They're so powerful that the legislators in California are afraid to do anything against them, because if they do, then they're not going to get the funding from them. In fact, I was talking to an assemblywoman just recently, a couple weeks ago, and what she told me, she said, you know what, when 1266 was passed, AB 1266 was passed, that's the transgender bill, the bathroom bill for public schools. One of the assemblymen told her, when she asked, why in the world would you guys pass this? How could it be that you would pass this bill? You're adults. You know what this assemblyman told her? Well, we didn't think the governor would actually sign it. We didn't think the governor would actually sign it. But they passed the bill so that they can have the favor of the California Teachers Association, the favor of Equality California. Where's the church? Why aren't they worried about what the church thinks? We Christians, why aren't they worried about this? And it concerns me. That's a big concern. So back to this video. Second grade school teacher talking about one of his second graders. Go ahead and roll the tape.
In my own classroom last year, I had a transgendered student, and I had to work very closely with my teammates in second grade and our administration, and really had to work with some of our substitutes that would come into our setting in order for them not to overreact, to not contact parents, and to try to understand, do some of that low-level questioning of parents to even see if the parent was aware of what was going on.
They had to do low-level questioning to even know whether the parents knew what was going on. Imagine your second grade child and this little girl that you send off to school, she likes playing soccer. And so she wears tennis shoes. And, she doesn't come, with the frilly hair every day. So you have a predator who's a teacher. A predator who's going to try to take your child and say, well, little Sally, why don't you use the boys' restroom? Because obviously you identify more as a boy. Frightening is right. That kind of thing is frightening. And so you have to be concerned about your kids. We are in an era where Satan is going to deceive many. He's going to send this spirit of Antichrist. And I believe that, honestly, and I say that in the last 60 days, I feel like that is what's come upon us. And he's going to deceive so many. And it's going to be people like this who are going to take our kids and try to cause them to have a new idea of what biology means. It's like going back in history when in public schools you couldn't teach about creationism anymore. And evolution is what had to be taught. And what is evolution? When your kids are being taught that, what are they going to question? They're going to question the biblical account because their teacher says that the Bible's not true. On that note, let me give you a quick story of a young man this is an awesome story. We've got a young man here in Temecula School District, and he's in 7th grade, and the teacher says, I want you to go home, I want you to read a nonfiction book for 30 minutes. This young man, his name is Jet Roman. I like that name, Jet. So Jet goes home, and by the way, they don't really have a home anymore because Jet's family has lost their home. Dad has cancer, and he's dying of cancer right now. And they're in a homeless shelter. It's apartments, and I'm on this board, and we help them. And basically, it's this project where we have apartments, and the families come in, and they actually are able to have an apartment. So it has a sense of not really being a homeless shelter. It's a place to live. It's home. But here they are. And so Jet comes home with his family, and so that night he reads the Bible. He's already going through a difficult time. You can already guess what's going to happen. Teacher said, bring your book in next day that you read. Now, the teacher's only purpose was to cause them to want to begin reading, to get more familiar and practice reading. They weren't going to write a book report or anything like that. And so Jet brings his nonfiction book back in, and that's the Bible. And so he puts it on his desk at the end of class when the teacher tells all the kids to put their books on their desk, and he's going to come around and get them stamp their homework sheets and say they completed their homework. And what happened? Well, as the teacher gets up to Jet, he says, "That's not a nonfiction book." And what Jet say? He says, "Well, honestly, Mr. So-and-so, I believe it is." And he says, "Well, I'll get back to you." And he walks on. And he goes around the rest of the class, stamps all their homework. And he walks to the front of the class, and he says, "All right, how many of you students think the Bible is nonfiction?" Now, imagine that. You're 7th grade. You've got the teacher who's acting in this, this demeaning fashion. And okay, now the whole class is going to determine whether this Christian kid's homework, whether he gets credit or not. Or maybe that's not the purpose, but really he just wants to humiliate him. Now, we see this kind of thing going on in public school all the time. This is just an anecdotal story for you guys to hear. So what happens? He says, "Class, how many of you think the Bible is nonfiction?" And you know what? In this class, full class, all but 2 of their kids raised their hand. Isn't that awesome? So, yeah, it's exciting, And here, this poor kid, he's struggling and having a hard time with all this, with just his family and everything that's happening. And to go through that and to be humiliated, but then thankfully, all of these kids raised their hand except for 2. And so ultimately it was the teacher who was humiliated. The mom came and she was so upset, and they called me and I said, "Well, let us send a letter. We're not going to file a lawsuit over this, but we want to send a letter. We want to correct this. We want to make sure this teacher and the school district knows that they cannot allow this kind of hostility toward religion in public schools." Now, it's unconstitutional, right? Well, I'm telling you it is. I shouldn't expect you guys. It's unconstitutional for any public official to show hostility toward religion. It used to be that we were fighting over whether or not we could allow prayer in public school and all. Well, now we've got to fight against the hostility against Christians. And I want to tell you, if you guys here, this is one of my goals, is we want to establish legal precedent that is very clear and convincing that public school teachers must not allow hostility in the classroom or express hostility toward Christian kids. And that's a real important thing. And we need to set that precedent. So, you know what the teacher did in a meeting he had with the parents after we sent this letter? He says, "You know what? I really didn't know that I was doing wrong. I didn't know the Bible. I didn't know it was nonfiction." He's a teacher, and he's been, educated. But this is the deceit. He doesn't think the Bible's true. Boy, time. What I'm going to do is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go look through all this, and I'm going to jump to this other video, and then I'm going to need to conclude. The next video is about SB 48. Now this one's about 3 minutes. So is that okay, Pastor? Okay. This video comes after Senate Bill 48 was passed, and Senate Bill 48 is about indoctrination of kids in public schools, requiring public schools to rewrite the curriculum to indoctrinate kids about homosexuality. So, for example, this bill, we tried to get a referendum on the ballot. We didn't get enough signatures. This was a few years ago. You guys, I'm sure, took signatures here probably. So, it's the law of the land, and textbooks are being rewritten as we speak, and materials are being handed out. So, the California Teachers Association, they were excited about this, and they were, thrilled that this new law is law now. And so, you're going to hear from a lady who works in the special projects for the California Teachers Association. You're going to hear from the second grade school teacher again and then you're going to hear from a public school librarian as well, who are all, the librarian is also on the board for the California Teachers Association as well. So go ahead and
when I got
that.
in education, there was nothing mentioned about anybody's sexual orientation. And I think it would have been good if all of us had gotten that at a much younger age. So it was part of our process, that it's not a separate entity. We barely learned about people's ethnicity and those types of things. So I think it will just make us better people in the long run. SB 48 is just going to make us better Americans.
It's going to put it in the curriculum.
In the curriculum.
But there's stuff out there now that supplemental materials that people
There's
can
lots
use.
of materials, supplemental materials about anything. I think when it's in the curriculum, though, it's putting it into our culture. That's a little bit of the difference. So there are resources out there for a lot of teachers to integrate, and it's out there now. But I think we got to make sure that they do it right and they put it in the curriculum right in a positive manner, because then you start to change the culture. So that's why I'm proud that SB 48 passed.
They can start right now. You don't have to wait till January. You can start today. And you can go through and look at whatever materials, whatever you're supposed to be teaching, and however you've made your syllabus or your objectives or whatever you're using to guide your instruction. Start adding in all of the accomplishments of everyone and get them in your program. And your students will love it because you're providing role models. You're going to reduce bullying because people aren't going to, they have something to look up to that are not different.
If there is opposition, is CTA there to help?
Absolutely. CTA was a major supporter of SB 48. Once Equality California, which I also sit on the board of, we were the ones who wrote the law. Mark Leno, who will be here later on Sunday morning, is the senator who pushed it through, and CTA was a support all the way through. Also, sitting on the sidelines waiting for the referendum to come to light, and it didn't, but we were there every step of the way supporting Equality California, making sure that if that were to happen, we would step up to the plate, because this affects every single student in this state, plus it meets the mission statement of CTA for providing a safe and equitable education for everyone. So this is if you're going to look at something that CTA can support, it's SB 48, because it helps every person in this state.
That's why it's really important that the themes in the literature along the lines of same-sex families, those types of things, partnerships, you're not teaching, but you're exposing children to life as it really is in California. And so I think you can do that as low as kindergarten, preschool. Definitely within the beginning grades. And I say that as a librarian. Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely critical. I mean, that is how we teach a lot of things in those lower levels, is through the literature that we have. So I think it's critical.
In 1 Timothy chapter 4, it says, "Now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons." And it continues. And, I just feel like that's today what the Lord is wanting me to encourage you, is that you need to be aware and be on your toes and be praying and being alert, asking God to give you wisdom and your kids, your grandkids, so that as we live amongst the world that we live in, that we would be aware and we would not be deceived, that the demons would flee from our homes, that we'd be protected, because these times are perilous. And millions are being led astray in our own public school system. At the same time, be encouraged, because, as persecution may come, we, as the church, boy, we're going to see Jesus soon. I believe it. But even if he doesn't come soon, it might be difficult at times. But what a blessing it is if you've ever prayed with someone to come to know the Lord? Have you seen the Holy Spirit work and movements? And with Pastor Chuck Smith passing away and going back and looking on the day of the Jesus movement, when I was just a kid, and my sister Lori, who's going to be out in our back at our table. I remember them taking me down to some of these concerts down in Costa Mesa Calvary Chapel, and it had a big, big impact on me. And seeing this Jesus movement and all these hippies coming to know Jesus, and I want to see that time again. And if it takes persecution, let it come. Pastor Tom, well, you're coming up. We have these booklets on the California public school system, Hijacked K through 12. They're in the back, and you can come back and you can pick one up. They're free. If you can make a donation of $5, do it. If you can't, don't worry about it. We want every one of you to at least walk away with one. If you've got grandkids, bring those. And we have some brochures in the back. You can sign up to be on our mailing list, and we will send out information. I think that's important for you to know. And, don't worry, we're not going to send you out an email, every hour, just every day. Just kidding, not even that. Once every week or two, we send out emails, usually. Sometimes there's things that are important. Sometimes it's a little more often than that. But thank you for having me.